It's funny how some kids just seem to breeze through social situations while others, well, they kind of have a tougher time, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And what we don't always see is how much that can really affect a kid.
Right.
Like we're talking about anxiety, loneliness, even how well they do in school or how they behave. Pretty serious stuff.
Absolutely.
And so today, we're diving deep into some research that's trying to figure out, like, why that is,
Okay.
and specifically, how a kid's communication skills might be tied to how their peers see them.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
So, we're talking about oral communicative competence, which sounds super jargony, but really it's just about how well a kid can share their thoughts and get what others are saying in everyday conversations.
Right. It's like being fluent in the language of social interaction.
Exactly.
Not just about knowing a bunch of words, it's more about how you use them.
And get this, we've got a whole pile of 25 different studies to look at.
Wow, 25.
25 studies, all looking at the link between this oral communicative competence and a child's sociometric status, which is basically a fancy way of saying, you know, are they the popular kid, the wallflower, or somewhere in between?
Makes sense.
And these studies, they cover kids from ages 1 all the way up to 12.
Okay, so a pretty wide range.
Huge range, yeah. So our mission today, if you will, is to dig into what these 25 studies can teach us about how a kid's communication skills relate to their social standing. And even more important, why that connection matters for their overall development.
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? Like, why do we care if kids fit in?
Exactly. It's not just about them having friends to hang out with at recess.
Right. It's so much deeper than that. I mean, think about it. Peer relationships are really the first place where kids learn how to navigate social norms.
Right. They figure out how to share, take turns, the basics.
Exactly. And see things from another person's perspective.
Yeah.
They're getting a chance to practice those pro-social behaviors that are super important for, getting along in the world.
And it's like a training ground that adults can't really replicate.
Totally. But when those connections are weak, or if a child is being actively rejected, well, that's where the research gets pretty concerning.
Yeah. What does it say about those kids?
Well, the review we're looking at shows a clear link to a higher risk of anxiety, loneliness, and even depression in kids who face peer rejection.
Oh, wow. That's heavy.
It is. And there's a meta-analysis mentioned that really backs that up, highlighting how much these kids struggle internally. But it goes beyond their emotional state. There's a connection to more external problems later on, too.
Like what?
Like you see more aggressive behavior, conduct issues, and sadly, an increased risk of substance abuse as they hit their teenage years.
Oh, that's so sad.
It is. And it doesn't stop there. The research shows that their school life can suffer too.
Oh, yeah. You mentioned something about that earlier, right?
Right. Rejected children are more likely to have trouble in school, they might get lower grades, and the risk of dropping out increases. So when we're looking at things like oral communicative competence, it's not just about social dynamics, it's about a kid's whole future.
So let's unpack this idea of oral communicative competence a little bit more.
Yeah.
What are the building blocks of that?
Well, the review leans on the work of Del Himes. He had a good framework for thinking about this.
Okay, what did he say?
Basically, he said it's more than just spitting out information. It's about the ability to convey and interpret messages effectively, and, this is key, to negotiate meaning within those specific social contexts.
Okay.
So it's not about grammar rules or memorizing vocabulary lists.
It's about knowing how to use language in a social setting.
Exactly, you got it. That's that sociolinguistic piece. Using language appropriately, using the right words at the right time for the right audience.
So it's like less about the dictionary and more about the social playbook of language.
Yes, exactly. It's like, how you wouldn't talk to your boss the same way you talk to your best friend.
Right. Totally different.
And, you're not going to use the same kind of language when you're joking around with your buddies compared to when you're having a serious conversation.
Makes sense.
Right. So oral communicative competence is all about navigating those subtle social nuances of language.
I'm with you.
It depends on the situation, who you're with, what you're talking about.
Yeah, so many factors.
Yeah, it's a whole bunch of skills working together,
Yeah.
It's knowing when to speak up, how to take turns, understanding cues like sarcasm, adapting your style based on who you're with.
So how on earth do researchers go about studying something this complex?
It's a good question, and it's a tough thing to measure, for sure.
Yeah, I bet.
The review says that the most common way is to actually observe kids interacting with each other in their natural environment.
So like on the playground or at school.
Yeah, exactly. Often they'll record these interactions, video or audio, and then they carefully code specific communication behaviors.
Okay, so what are they looking for?
Things like how often a kid asks questions, makes demands, interrupts, takes turns speaking, or how they respond to what their peers are saying.
So they're getting down to the nitty-gritty of how these kids are communicating with each other.
Exactly. It's all about the details. But there's another less common method, too, using standardized tests.
Okay, so more like a controlled setting.
Right. The Nijmegen test for pragmatics is one they mentioned, and these tests tend to have more structured scenarios, to see how a child would ask for help or start a conversation.
So it seems like there are two camps here, right?
Kind of, yeah.
Like watching kids in the wild versus testing them in a controlled setting.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like the nature documentary versus the lab experiment.
Yeah, and the review actually points this out.
They do.
Yeah. They say there's a trade-off. Like, observing kids naturally gives you really authentic data. You're seeing how they communicate in real-life situations.
Right, super realistic.
But it can take forever to analyze all that data, and it's tough to make sure everyone's coding those behaviors the same way.
Yeah, I could see that.
On the other hand, standardized tests are more objective, and it's easier to compare results across different kids. But some argue that you lose some of the spontaneity and nuance of real conversations.
You miss those natural, in-the-moment interactions.
Exactly. And what's interesting is the review says none of the studies they looked at used both approaches.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like imagine combining those two, you'd get such a richer understanding.
A much more complete picture. So, after looking at all these studies using all these different methods, what's the bottom line? What does it tell us about the link between communication skills and how well a kid fits in?
Well, the big takeaway is that there is a definite connection between a child's oral communicative competence and their sociometric status. Like across all these studies, they found that kids who get rejected by their peers tend to communicate in ways that are less responsive than kids who are well liked.
Okay, less responsive. Can you give me an example? What does that look like in real life?
Sure, imagine a group of kids playing, and one child shares an idea, and another kid, instead of acknowledging that idea or building on it, just jumps in with something completely different, like they weren't even listening.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Right. Or think about a kid who misses those subtle cues, like someone wanting to say something, and just keeps on talking.
So they're not really tuned into the back and forth of the conversation.
Yeah, they're less aware of what others are bringing to the table. So as a listener, think about those kids you've seen who just seem a little out of sync with everyone else.
Yeah, they're not quite on the same wavelength.
That's it. And that lack of responsiveness can be a big red flag.
So the review goes deeper than that, right? It talks about specific behaviors linked to a kid's social standing.
Yeah, some really interesting stuff. There's this study by Black in 1992. They looked at how preschoolers play pretend together.
Oh, interesting.
And what they found was that kids who were disliked were way more likely to boss the other kids around, telling them what to play and how to play it. They'd shoot down other kids' ideas and basically make the whole game about them.
So not a lot of let's play together, more like this is how we're playing.
Exactly. They weren't very collaborative. And it shows how some communication styles can create real friction in social situations. But it's not always so clear-cut. The review also talks about this study by Nerland and Martinson in 2011, where they found that how clear and understandable a kid's speech was actually correlated with them getting positive attention from their peers.
Okay, that makes sense.
But get this, things like initiating a conversation or trying to get someone's attention, those things didn't actually seem to be linked to their social standing.
So it's not just about putting yourself out there, it's about how you do it.
You got it. It's about quality over quantity. So some communication skills are more important for social acceptance than others. And what the review ultimately suggests is that effective communication, communication that helps the conversation flow smoothly, that's persuasive, and that shows you're aware of the other person's perspective, that's the kind of communication that generally leads to greater social acceptance.
Now, we know that kids interact in all sorts of different settings. Does the actual context of the interaction play a role in how communication skills come into play?
Oh, absolutely. There's a study from 1989 by Hazen and Black that looked at this specifically.
Okay, what did they do?
They observed kids in two different scenarios. One where a kid was trying to join a game that was already in progress, kind of like the entry context, and another where a kid was already playing with someone and then a third kid came along, so more of a host context.
Okay, so two different situations.
Exactly. And they found that kids who were well-liked were able to switch up their communication style depending on the situation. Like, if they were trying to join a game, they might ask more questions to catch up.
So they could adapt.
Yeah, but kids who were disliked, they kind of used the same communication approach, whether they were trying to break into a group or if they were already part of one.
So they weren't very flexible.
Not at all. It's like they had one communication mode and that was it.
Interesting.
And then there's another study by Black and Hazen. This one's from 1990, and they compared how kids interacted with peers they knew well versus peers they didn't know.
Okay, familiar versus unfamiliar.
Exactly, and they found that kids who were disliked were less responsive and made more irrelevant comments, especially when they were interacting with kids they already knew.
So less responsive with kids they were already familiar with. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it is, and the reviews suggest that this could point to a sort of negative feedback loop.
What do you mean?
Well, if a kid has had a bunch of negative experiences with certain peers, they might be less likely to engage with them in a positive way in the future.
So they're kind of withdrawing because of those past experiences.
Yeah, and sadly, that could just reinforce those negative perceptions and make it even harder to be accepted.
That's a tough cycle to break. So let's talk about gender for a moment. Does being a boy or a girl play a role in how communication and social acceptance are linked?
You know, the research on this is kind of all over the place. Like, there's a study by Murphy and Faulkner from 2006 that found that popular girls were more likely to do things like remind others of the rules during play, give more direct instructions, and really explain themselves when they disagreed with someone,
Okay.
compared to girls who weren't as popular. But they didn't see those same differences between popular and unpopular boys, and they thought that maybe it had to do with girls putting more emphasis on, getting along and keeping the peace within the group.
So girls are more focused on maintaining those relationships.
Maybe that's one interpretation. But then you've got a study by Vanderwilt and his colleagues from 2016, and they actually found a link between communication skills and peer acceptance only for boys.
Really, only for boys.
Yeah, and their theory was that good communication skills might be more important for boys when it comes to holding back aggression,
Interesting.
which then, would make them more accepted by their peers. So it's like almost opposite findings from these two studies.
So what's the takeaway here with these conflicting results?
The review basically says that any gender differences they found might just be specific to the group of kids they were looking at or the situation they were in, not necessarily a universal thing.
So more research is needed.
For sure, and with larger groups of kids from different backgrounds, so we can really get a handle on how gender plays into all of this.
What about age? Does the importance of communication skills for social acceptance change as kids get older?
That's another great question, and the review touches on that too. The studies they looked at cover kids from toddlers all the way up to preteens, right?
Right, a huge range.
And it seems like that connection between communication skills and social status might be stronger when kids are younger.
Okay, so it matters more in those early years. Why do you think that is?
Well, one study they mentioned found that a child's ability to understand what others are saying, their receptive language skills, those were really important for social standing in early childhood.
Okay, so how well they listen.
Exactly. And there's a meta-analysis from 2016 by Trish and his colleagues that supports that idea too. They found a stronger link between how good a kid is with language and how much their peers like them when they're younger.
Interesting.
The review offers a couple of possible reasons for this. First, younger kids are still learning language like crazy. Their brains are sponges.
Yeah, they pick things up so fast at that age.
Exactly. So those communication skills that are developing so rapidly, they have a big impact on how they navigate those early social interactions. And then by the time they hit middle childhood, most kids have got a good grasp of the basics of communication.
So it's less of a distinguishing factor.
Great. Other things might become more important for their social relationships.
This brings up a pretty fundamental question. Is it that kids get rejected because they're not good at communicating? Or is it that being rejected makes it harder for them to develop those communication skills in the first place?
The classic chicken or the egg question, right?
Exactly. Which comes first?
So the review actually mentions a study by Kempe and colleagues from 1992 that tried to figure this out. Well, they had a pretty small group of kids, so they couldn't really say for sure what caused what.
So more research is needed.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But the review really emphasizes that it's probably not a one-way street. It's more likely that both things are influencing each other.
So it's a loop, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. A kid's communication skills can affect how their peers see them, and those social experiences can then affect how their communication skills develop. It's all connected. And because most of the studies were just looking at associations, not cause and effect, and a lot of them had small groups of kids, we don't have a clear answer yet.
So what are some of the big limitations of the research so far, and where should we be focusing our efforts going forward?
Well, the review highlights a few things. First, there's no real consistency in how they define and measure oral communicative competence across all these studies.
But it's hard to compare apples to apples.
Right, makes it tough to draw big conclusions. And most of the studies were done in the USA, so we need more research in different cultures to see if these patterns hold up.
We need a more global perspective.
Absolutely. And then there's the issue of small sample sizes, which makes it hard to generalize to a larger population of kids.
So bigger studies, more diversity, different cultures. What else?
The review is really pushing for more longitudinal studies.
Okay, so following the same kids over time.
Exactly. That way we can see how communication skills and social status develop and interact over the long haul.
Makes sense.
And they also want to see more experimental studies where researchers actually manipulate certain aspects of communication to see how it affects social outcomes.
Okay, so testing specific things.
Right. And of course, we always need to be mindful of things like context, gender, and age. Those all play a role.
So how we study communication is important too, right?
Yeah.
Any suggestions there?
The review suggests that we try to be more consistent in how we define and measure oral communicative competence. They even threw out this idea of using Bakhtin's concept of anticipation in communication as a unifying idea.
Anticipation.
Yeah, it's like being in tune with your conversational partner, being responsive and persuasive.
Interesting.
And they also really stress the importance of using mixed methods research, combining those observations of kids in natural settings with more structured assessments.
So getting the best of both worlds.
Exactly. And lastly, they suggested that future studies look at both how much a kid is liked and how much they're disliked.
So not just one or the other.
Right, because those might be influenced by different communication factors.
That makes sense. So big picture, what's the key takeaway from all this research on communication and peer acceptance?
Well, I think the main point is that there's a strong link between how kids communicate and how well they're accepted by their peers. Kids who face rejection, they often communicate differently. They're less responsive, less adaptable, and they might struggle with collaboration.
Right.
But it's a super complex relationship with lots of different factors at play, and we still have a lot to learn about what causes what.
So for our listeners out there, what's one thing you want them to walk away with today?
Well, I think it's important to be aware of how communication skills, even those subtle ones, can shape a child's social experiences. Really listening to others, expressing yourself clearly, and picking up on those unspoken social cues, those are all crucial for connecting with others.
They're the foundation for building relationships.
Exactly. And if we recognize how important these skills are and we find ways to nurture them in kids, that can have a huge impact on their well-being, their social development, and their sense of belonging. It's a reminder that there's so much more to learn about how kids communicate with each other.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating world to explore. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.